Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Start Your Spark, an online educational program that helps you develop your first business. So, an old saying went like this: there are three types of people in this world. The first type is ignorant and arrogant. These people do not seek advice from others and do not like to listen to advice from others. Therefore, since we all know Earth is a place that's full of traps and life is a process of dealing with these traps and moving on, they fall into more traps at the start of their life than others. It's very difficult to climb out of these traps, and it makes it very difficult to develop a successful business. The second type of person is a person who is humble yet passive. This type of person has the humility to listen to the advice of others, yet they do not have the active will to avoid and walk around these traps. Hence, most of the time, the second type falls into the same traps as the first type of person does. And then there's the third type of person, a person who is both humble and also an active learner. This type of person is humble enough to listen and seek advice from others, yet they also actively try to avoid these traps to give themselves more room for success in the future. This episode teaches you how to become the third type of person, the third type of humble and active entrepreneur. And I hope that this episode could be a fast track to your success. So, this episode is dedicated to three different sections. First, how to avoid being an ignorant and arrogant person of type 1. Section 2 is how to not be a passive person, but also to be a humble person. And the third type is how do you outsource advice to become this third type of person. So, how to avoid to be ignorant and arrogant. Let's start with this simple illustration. If you are a person who refuses to listen to most advice or find it difficult to seek advice from others, essentially you're walking through life with a blindfold. Life is like a path. Then you do not know where this path leads, nor you cannot see the struggles and obstacles that face you inside this path. So therefore, the process of becoming less ignorant and less arrogant is a process of taking off this blindfold and adjusting your eyes so they can be the primary way that you can walk this path. They can guide you. So, starting from me, I was definitely a very arrogant person when I was young. I refused to listen to advice, and I felt like, I know everything in the world. However, I realized that this was because I had a very low self-esteem. In the face of, I'm so confident, I can actually do all of this myself, I realized that it was actually my low self-confidence, my feeling that if I was being critiqued by another person, I would feel less of a person myself. That's the reason why I refused to listen to advice. Therefore, to teach another person how to start listening to advice, I would say to build your self-confidence through very simple ways. I felt like the easiest way for me to build self-confidence was to cold email people or to text people on LinkedIn. That's one of the first ways you can reach out to people for advice, because this way you're not putting your face and your whole identity under the scrutiny of others, but you're also having valuable experiences in reaching out to people. The second step would definitely be try to reach out to people around you face to face, organize meetings. Because I'm a student, I like to organize meetings with my professors. And in this way, I can have an intellectual talk with them about, hey, does my business make sense? Do you think it would reach the targeted audience? What things do you think would make my business better? These are simple questions you can ask them to leverage your success. And the last type is definitely to reach out to more prominent people and meet them face to face. You can do this through email, you can do this through cold calling, you can just present your ideas at many conferences, then people might even reach out to you to give you advice. This is the simplest way and the most straightforward way how to become less ignorant and less arrogant as an entrepreneur. Now on to the second section of this video. How do you be less passive as a person and actively utilize the advice that you are given towards the project you're trying to create. So coming back to me, I also went through this phase where I was humble enough to do and listen to advice, but yet I am not an active learner enough to put these advice actually into practice. So when I was about 15, 16, it was around the same time, I started reading a lot of entrepreneurship books like Atomic Habits, The 48 Laws of Power, the 7 habits of successful people, stuff like that. But I realized I was passively absorbing these books. I was looking for things I can learn from, obviously, but I was not using my mind to critique these books. I was not actively thinking about how I can implement the strategies within these books for my own benefit. And I also realized that a lot of these books are not the best books. So to take the 48 Laws of Power as an example, I found that it was a book that is totally not applicable to our daily lives because it was giving examples of people back in the 14th, 13th, 12th century. And the things that they learned back in the day, I found are hugely unapplicable to our daily lives. Thus, using my ability to critically analyze, hey, do I actually need this advice? Am I wasting my time for this advice? I realized that books such as those do not give me the best way to develop and enhance my business. And I realized another book such as The Alchemist might have helped me a lot more because it was talking about a teenager finding the purpose of life and finding what truly defines him. And I think that is a lot more important and a lot more good of a read for me than the 48 Laws of Power. Therefore, by using active reasoning, I realized I can avoid a lot of the potholes and wasted time to develop, to put into, use it for something much better. And lastly, how do you outsource advice? How do you become an active learner, but also a humble person? So I would say this is actually more simple than what you might think. You gotta realize that you gotta use advice as a second eye for your project. Using advice for guidance, but not to rely necessarily on other people's advice. Also, I would say, do not use too many people to advise you. Because oftentimes, when you take an example of cooking, if the dish you're trying to cook is the project you're trying to develop, your business, let's say, and the more ingredients you put in, does not mean that the end product is gonna be delicious. It totally does not mean that. It means that there's more chaos in your mouth when you eat the project, when you eat the food. So therefore, I think it's much better if you have 2 or 3 dedicated people who are willing to examine your project. So I set out 3 criteria that I think that might help when you're seeking advice from other people. So the first criteria is that the person must critique your work. This means that they must give you active feedback that you can follow, and they must be not scared to critique you, right? They must be not scared to tell you that you are wrong in this scenario. Therefore, I don't think it's the best idea to take one of your friends as a person who's looking over your project. I think a person who is more superior than you, for example, a teacher, for example, your boss in work, for example, a mentor that you look up to, might be a good person you look to critique your work for. Another thing is recurring. This person must have a decent relationship with you, not like a friendly relationship, but like a more professional relationship with you, that they are willing to meet you on recurring times to examine your project. I think this is so important because it's not about one meeting. It's not about one piece of advice that's gonna change your entire business. It's about this kind of repeating cycle of advices that they can give you so they can lead you in the correct way towards the success. And the third thing, I think, which is the most important part, is that you must devise an active plan to follow with the person that is advising you, right? So in 3 months, this is what I'm trying to do. In 6 months, this is what I'm trying to do. To have a time scale and to have a plan is so important for you moving forward, because then you must feel like there's an obligation to finish all of this which is actually very good because once you have that obligation, you can do more stuff in a period of short time. So that's it. This is the episode, Ask. So to recap shortly, I talked about the first one, how to avoid being ignorant and arrogant. The second one, how to avoid being passive. And thirdly, how can you become an active learner and outsource advice? Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.